Chapter 1. The House Where No One Spoke Aloud. When Jake first saw his grandfather's house after a 10-year hiatus, the sky was painted in the colors of an old watercolor painting, faded gold, diluted indigo, and gray, like a held breath. The house stood on a hill, as if patiently waiting for his return. It didn't look abandoned, but it couldn't be called alive either. The curtains in the windows were neatly drawn, the door was unlocked, but it still seemed to be closed off, as if saying, "Don't rush." Jake's mother walked ahead, quietly, without a word. She didn't utter a single memory, a single phrase that could connect the boy to this place. Her gait betrayed her fatigue, not from the road, but from the fact that she had to sort through not only things, but also the past. Jake was the last to enter the house. The smell was the same as in his childhood, a mixture of old wood, lemon soap, and something elusively warm, as if the air retained the warmth of footsteps, laughter, and words once spoken here. He ran his fingers over the wallpaper, feeling for the familiar texture, patterns of leaves in which you could see birds or faces if you looked long enough. In the kitchen, the ticking of the clock was the only sound filling the house. Everything else, the walls, windows, even the floor, seemed to hold its breath. His mother arranged boxes, laid out tools, sorted through things in the sideboard. But Jake didn't move. He stood as if his feet were rooted to the floor. Something about this place made him listen, wait, peer. Later, in the evening, he went out into the garden. The meadow behind the house was overgrown with thorny weeds and stems as thin as glass. The rusty swing no longer swung. Only the old bench by the tree still stood, covered with moss and thyme. His grandfather used to sit there and tell stories, not magical, not made up, but simple, about birds that return to the same nest, about cats that know more than they say, about the staircase to the attic, where if you climb it at a certain hour, you can hear what no one else can hear. That evening, Jake couldn't sleep. When his mother had gone to bed, he left the room barefoot. The house did not creak under his footsteps, as if it knew that he was walking quietly, that he was not disturbing, but listening. The staircase to the attic was narrow and worn. He climbed it as one climbs a memory, step by step, not knowing what he would find at the top. There was light there, soft, dim, like from a lantern covered by a palm. The attic was empty, but in the depths, in the very shadows, among the old boxes, stood a wooden ladder leaning against the roof. It was strange, new, as if just assembled, without dust, without time. It led upward, into darkness, into emptiness, into the sky. Jake approached and placed his hand on the railing. It was warm. Chapter 2. The warmth of wood and the coldness of memory. The next day, Jake didn't tell his mother about the ladder. He simply woke up before her, poured himself some tea into an old porcelain mug with a crack in the handle, and sat down on the porch steps. The morning was foggy, but not damp. The fog spread across the garden, as if someone had poured milk on the ground. The currant bushes stood like ghosts, and dragonflies with wet wings rose from the grass. Jake watched it all with that strange concentration that only people who have just heard something important but don't yet understand what it is can have. Inside the house, everything was going on as usual. His mother was sorting through the dishes, dusting, muttering something about repairs. Her voice sounded muffled, as if the walls didn't want to let it out. Jake could hardly hear her. All his attention was focused upward, toward the attic, toward the ladder he hadn't touched last night, only placing his hand on it as if to check whether it existed. The day passed in silence. He wandered around the garden, looked into the shed, found an old tin can with a rusty knife and a crumpled ruler, all that remained of his childhood headquarters. He saw this place and didn't recognize it. The grass had grown, the fence was crooked, even the sky seemed lower. But the attic wouldn't let him go. One feeling kept spinning in his head, the warmth of wood. That wasn't right. Wood in the attic couldn't be warm, especially at night. What did that mean? That it was alive? When the sun began to set, he felt the call again. Not a voice. Not a call in the literal sense. Just a desire. Or maybe a necessity. As if something important would disappear forever if he didn't go there today. And then, after dark, when his mother had gone to bed, he stepped onto the creaky stairs again. This time, he didn't stop. Climbing into the attic, he immediately noticed that the staircase had changed. It wasn't immediately visible. It was now slightly off to the side, behind some old suitcases. And it seemed higher. It stretched toward the ceiling, to a point where there was no hatch, window, or opening. Just a wall, and that was it. But when Jake took his first step, the staircase responded with a soft crunch under his foot, and the ceiling slowly disappeared. It didn't open. It disappeared like torn fabric in water. He climbed up. Chapter 3. Where the Forgotten Lives. When Jake climbed the last step, he expected to see a dusty attic ceiling or perhaps wooden beams under the roof. But everything had disappeared. The space he entered had no corners. It resembled an ink lake with shadows floating in it. The floor beneath his feet was wooden, but his footsteps did not echo. The air seemed to stand still, but it smelled of rain. Not summer rain, not fresh rain, but autumn rain, heavy rain, with hints of old paper and forgotten clothes. Jake looked around. The outlines of objects appeared ahead of him. A thin chair with worn upholstery, a mirror with a crack in the center, a cabinet door ajar, as if someone had just touched it. He took a step, and the room changed. Now he was standing in the kitchen of his grandmother's house, which had not existed for 10 years. The stains on the tablecloth were in the same places, the curtains swayed slightly in the breeze, and even the same clock was ticking in the corner, its hands always 3 minutes fast. But this was not a reconstruction or a dream, it was real. His grandmother was sitting on a chair, not young and not old, exactly as he remembered her the last time he saw her. Her face was calm, but her eyes were like those of a person who knows more than they can say. She looked at him, without smiling, but without condemning him either. Jake didn't speak. He understood that words were unnecessary in this place. Different rules applied here, not earthly ones. He simply sat down opposite her, as he had done long ago when he came in from the street and told her how he had played cowboys and Indians with his friends or searched for treasure under the raspberry bushes. His grandmother placed her hand on the table. Her fingers, thin and sinewy, traced a circle on the tabletop. And in that circle, a photograph appeared. Not digital, not color. Gray, faded, as if washed out by rain. In it was Jake, just a boy, and his father. His father was laughing, holding him by the shoulder. He didn't remember this picture, and wasn't sure it had ever existed. He looked up. His grandmother was gone. In her place was only a rocking chair, slowly swaying. The ticking of the clock grew louder, like the roar of water in a cave. The walls shook, and the ceiling was once again covered in shadow. He understood. The attic was not just a storage room. It was a place of memory, but not his. It was a home for all the forgotten feelings that haunted him. When he returned, the staircase no longer stretched upward. It had disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. But he still held the old, faded photograph in his hand, which smelled of rain. Chapter 4. The House That Won't Let Go. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, clutching an old photograph in his palm. The street outside the window lived its usual life. Occasional headlights, the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. But there was no usualness in Jake's head. Everything he saw in the attic defied explanation. It wasn't a dream. He remembered every smell, every step, every breath. In the morning, he tried to go back upstairs. He went up to the attic, opened the very door. But behind it, only emptiness. Dust, cobwebs, an old suitcase with books. No chair, no photograph on the table, no grandmother. He sat down on the floor and clasped his head in his hands. What was that? And why exactly now, after so many years, did this house decide to reveal its memory to him? The answer did not come immediately. He was again sorting through things in the attic, in complete silence. In one of the chests, he found an envelope. The handwriting on it was recognizable to her grandmother's. Inside was a sheet of paper, yellowed, but neatly folded. There was only one sentence. You must not forget who you are, even if everyone around you forgets. He reread it 10 times. A simple phrase. But it had everything. He realized. The attic had shown him more than just the past. It reminded him that all the answers were within himself. He had been looking outside for what had long been inside. The next day, Jake walked along the streets of the city. The same houses, the same passers-by, but something had changed. He felt the support in himself that he had lost. His gaze became straighter, his movements more confident. He went to the same photo studio that he had closed many years ago after his father's death, and opened the door. The room was dusty, but the cameras and lenses stood on the shelves, like soldiers awaiting orders. He began to wipe the lenses, start the equipment, change the burnt-out lamps. His fingers regained their confidence. He began taking pictures, first of streets, then of faces. He saw beauty again in the wrinkles of passers-by, in the reflection of rain on glass, in the broken edges of old signs. And he hung the photograph he had found in the attic in a frame above his desk. And everyone who came and asked, "Who is that next to you?" And he answered, "It is a memory, the one that will not let you lose yourself." A few months passed. An exhibition opened in the city. Jake's works took up an entire room, black and white, sharp, deep. People approached each one as a window into themselves. Someone cried. Someone smiled. But the most important work was the one hanging in the corner. That same old photograph, a boy and his father. Under it was a sign, a house that remembers you even when you have forgotten yourself. And in that moment, Jake realized he was no longer afraid of the past. Because now it was no longer holding him back. It had become his support, his anchor. And everyone who saw his work felt the same.